Can you imagine living outside so long that you're afraid to come in? Or that when sleeping inside feels even scarier than sleeping on the streets? When Rockford, Illinois set out to end homelessness between veteran and chronic homelessness, they knew they needed to find answers to these questions. And today we've heard personal stories as well as large-scale statistics, facts, and trends that are all impacting Colorado. We've got some challenges, and we're here to take action. Congrats for you all making it here today. So we, us, people, that's it, right? People are the commonality between everything that we're seeing today, our challenges that we're facing, systems thinking. It all comes down to us as an individual. So it's about how we do our work, about how we connect with each other, the small changes to our thinking and processes that can result in big impacts that ripple from individual and across systems. Back to Rockford. Rockford changed how its homelessness response system worked by adopting the core elements of the Built for Zero methodology. Who's heard of Built for Zero? Google it. Worth your time. Built for Zero is a movement by over 100 communities currently that are working to measurably and equitably end homelessness and proving that it is possible. Rockford is one such case. They, the people in Rockford, and they do have names, they worked very hard, and they were in all elements of government and agency and nonprofit and regular citizens and residents who said, homelessness is something we want to do something about. And instead of it being this abstract idea of homelessness, they brought it down to a personal level. And they said, I see George on the corner every day, and he's been here for 8 years. Why won't George come in? We've offered to give George a shower. We've given him some resources here and there. What's stopping George? And so Rockford took it back to those two questions. Can you imagine living outside so long that you're afraid to come in? And what happens when sleeping inside feels scarier than staying on the streets? When we start solving problems at the way they impact people, we start seeing solutions. And they may feel small, right? The way I get my child to school feels like a small solution. But if I'm making a change, and all the parents in my neighborhood make a change, and the school district makes a change, and we create new policies and better ways and investment, all of a sudden these interconnections, these systems start to click in a fast way. And maybe it starts slow by that individual, so don't lose hope when it feels too hard. But when we think about problem solving, it comes down to us. All right. So, of course, this is the bullet point version. I have 5 minutes, and we do entire courses in systems thinking. So I'm going to spend the next 2 or 3 minutes giving you my quick advice. A people-first approach, because people solve problems, and people also acutely feel those problems. The impacts of the very real challenges we throw on PowerPoint slides and here on the news, those are folks that we have and that we've met and sometimes are us as well. Quick hits, get out those pens. No. So we're going to start with the 5 W's, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who, what problem are we trying to solve? But then take it a step further. What problem are we really trying to solve? And a step further, who are we solving it for? How do they feel that problem? What problems are interconnected with that first problem? And of course, by then you're ready, your head is exploding because you've gone too far and you're in a circle and you throw that piece of paper away. We've been there, right? And we start again and come back to what's the first incremental bite we can take? Who needs to be in the room? What data will we use to measure success? How will we measure it, repeat it, and keep that communication going? Because it's not a one-stop, we're going to keep that going. We're going to design our process to meet people, know their name, and know their names, right? It's not solving homelessness, we're solving homelessness for George. And how are we going to do that? We're going to make sure he knows where to go and that somebody is going to get him when he gets there because he's at risk to not make it and not follow through. So we have to change the way we're going to allocate resources based on the needs of an individual person. It feels scary, it feels expensive, but it also has real impacts that you can point to and stories that can be told about those successes and that can be shared and can be built on until there is a movement and there is excitement around the things we are doing that brings real change and brings a tear to your eye. We're going to expand our approach into the micro to address those challenges on the personal level, remembering a few points. The digital divide is real. I sell technology. I spend all day talking about how tech can solve our problems. But the fact is, the digital divide is real, And people are solving problems. Tech may make us faster, may help us analyze data, may see these systems and visualize them and help us build bridges, but we need to make sure that we don't forget that human component and that the digital divide is real. 2, people are experts in their own realm. If we are going to pay a consultant to come and do a traffic study, you better pay the folks who walk along that street or who take their wheelchair in a place that is unsafe to say, what is your experience? Their time is valuable and their data point is just as meaningful. Data and insights have value. You need them not only to understand a challenge, but to understand the solution and to continue to innovate. We need that continuous feedback loop, not only to feed out, but also for folks to understand how what may feel like a minor contribution is part of a larger solution. Peer pressure works. Let's do it. Value is a two-way street. If you're getting from something a value, make sure you're returning that, whether that is a network, whether that is an introduction, whether it's just taking the time to do a reshare or a like on a post for something that is a cause you believe in. It matters. The companies are listening. You can never over-communicate. The more people we have in this conversation, even if it feels too early, right? Today I had a coworker who I said, should we invite this other person to the conversation? They responded, too soon, Michelle. And I said, you say, what? No. At the very least, we're gonna let them know we're having a conversation. And then if they think that they want to be in that conversation, they are invited. It's open door, let's bring them in. There is no gate of entry here. All right, I'm probably running out of time. So, talking about puzzles, I thought I brought a drink. I'm like thirsty here. So, just like a puzzle, we may all be moving pieces around, our individual components, but we need to work together. If someone's doing the borders, who can do the inside? Who can work on the yellows? Who can bring these solutions together? As the solvers, it's our job to say, oh, here's the missing puzzle piece, or maybe you should turn that around and it'll fit better. Here's another resource you should check out. So we are puzzle masters and we want to work together to bring these solutions. So I ask each of you, when we are working to find solutions, be sure that we are asking the right questions to figure out why and what really matters to individuals. Our success depends on the willingness to try new approaches, including the ones that are tailored to specific individuals whose fears or circumstances present unusual challenges, right? It's not gonna be a one size fits all. We're going to have to go bespoke, and we can do it. So final takeaways, rinse and repeat. Don't settle for solutions that don't define the who, what, where, why, when, why, and how. Identify and pay for value. Celebrate progress, no matter how small. Complaints are insights too, and all input is valuable. And ask for those solutions, not the problems. Thank you so much.
A lot of perspectives today, and this is why I'm here. I'm an engineer, and if you go to a lot of symposiums, there's not a lot of perspectives, and engineering symposiums are the worst. So I'm Mark Reiner. I'm the Director of Resilient Infrastructure at Jacobs Engineering, very large engineering firm. And I bring that up because that perspective, what drives an engineering firm, is new infrastructure built for government agencies and utilities. My focus has always been, at least the last 2 decades, on existing infrastructure, aging, and for communities. And they hired me anyhow. So I'm going to start with a quote. And this is part of what I bring into my perspective into work every day is we can't impose logic and make it happen. We have to understand how people make it, and it's not, so I'll read it. So there's no logic that can be superimposed on the city. People make it, and it's to them, not the buildings, that we must fit our plans. But I want to change it out because buildings, think of who the stakeholders are for buildings. Somebody owns a building, and then people choose to live or work there. So it's a limited, one building doesn't mean all the buildings. If you separate out buildings and put in utilities, and you say, who are the stakeholders of water? Who are the stakeholders of energy? Then it broadens the conversation. So this is like you saw me up here fumbling the formatting, you'll see. So that road is closed. We must make our plans for utilities. Has anybody ever seen a road close? It's a joke, right? Because that doesn't say a water main or gas main or whatever. The road is closed. That's all the information you need to know. It's a disruption to your commute. It's a disruption to your business if you're on that block. It's a big deal. So these are all messed up. I'm just going to read it. You can't see it, but in New York City, the roads are cut open 550 times per day.
Wow.
Yeah, right? When we cut into asphalt, because we bury all of our infrastructure, we introduce water into the asphalt. And in northern climates, even Denver, a lot of potholes. 20,000 are patched every January in Toronto. Huge part of the budget that could be going elsewhere. Despite robust asset management, very smart engineers, we still have 720 water main breaks per day. Right? I'm getting a lot of woes. I like it. That's all right. And just because of that, if you live in the city, I know Jessica's the closest here, but or no, you're the closest. But we've just become inured to disruptions.
I have a lot on my street right now, so.
Exactly. You will see spray paint. I call them urban hieroglyphics of where all of our infrastructure is. You can paint a mural on the street, and then the utility comes by and paints it, and like, here's my 2-inch gas line. But we just become inured to disruptions, and how are we being impacted by that? So this is, I hope the audio will work on this one. This happened in February 9th in Philadelphia.
Right now on NBC 10 News at 5, a massive water main break leaves a local neighborhood underwater. Police and firefighters went door to door, checking on people after a river of water rushed over streets and sidewalks and flooded homes. And take a look. This isn't just impacting a few homes. An entire neighborhood is now trying to clean up from the destruction caused by all this water.
Okay, so 16 schools were closed. Look at all the houses flooded. One water main break. Now this is the video that I'm gonna have to, I couldn't get the audio working, so I'm gonna imitate what he's saying, but you can see. So first of all, FEMA does hazard mitigation, makes every local government do hazard mitigation planning, but aging infrastructure is not a hazard. So what is being said right here is the reporter's asking, well, he's with the water department. Why did you let this disaster happen? The reporter called it a disaster. His response was, we're in line. This is our KPIs, our key performance indicators. We have 25 water main breaks per 100 miles of pipe in Philadelphia. We need to get the most out of it. Oh. So here's an entire neighborhood, 16 schools closed, and they've met their key performance indicators, okay? So his focus is on that one spot. So like I said, a building is a address, but a sector is a regional, national issue. So his focus is on that one spot. They're going to patch it up, and they're responsible for the direct cost of doing that. So here's the community response. Here's the response of somebody who was impacted.
The basement is, flooded. I don't even know, that'll mess with the foundation of the house. I'm very concerned.
So these are short videos, but her perspective was not on the water main break, right? Her perspective was on her asset. So what we are missing in America in planning, I'm an engineer, but I've been talking to Planning Association for a long time because we are not dealing with the quantification of aging infrastructure. So what Steve brought up in his video was that utilities are charged with their direct costs because of indemnification. The total cost of that failure in Philadelphia will be millions and millions and millions of dollars, and the water department would be responsible for about 1% of that. All this is going to be eaten up into the pockets of the homeowners, et cetera. There's some, like Denver Water has some good neighbor stuff, that the Berkeley water main incident, but they're not going to pay for everything. So this aging infrastructure is impacting communities, and you can see where they're at. So this is a group of ours in Jacobs where I work that ran this for me. And what you're looking at is that little star. Yep. So, yeah, that's as far as I go on that. But that star is where that water main break occurred at 56 in Springfield in the King Sessing neighborhood of Philadelphia. So it's a point location. And what you're looking at is a 3D representation of traffic from cell phones, okay? So this is a traffic, and look what happens after the water main break. And what that is showing is okay, the water main broke, so we have to go around it, right? So that's just traffic, but that is a loss of business in the area. You can't get to local businesses. people that work at the local business are losing hourly wages. So this is a ripple effect across all sectors and the community. And I like this because if you look at it as kind of the warp and weft of a fabric, we weave our infrastructure into the communities. So you can't just say a water main break is a point thing. It's a perspective from the community. No, it's not. So this is my other silly cartoon, but this is actually one of the most important slides. So that's a water main break. Sorry, it's a water main. On the left, it's a date it's installed. On the right, it's the date it's going to be repaired or replaced, so it's a timeline. And this is the utilities view of our assets under our cities. They're looking one way. How much more life can I get out of it? What is a remaining useful life or economic value of that asset? And their calculus is based on that direct cost. What do I have to pay for if it fails? And that goes into probability of failure, consequence of failure. What we're saying, what I've been saying for on trial, is we need a city perspective that quantifies how do we look at all these disruptions. The 550 road cuts per day in New York City, what are the social costs of failed infrastructure, and how do we start keeping track of these, our own KPIs, key performance indicators, to talk about infrastructure from a community level. So in a nutshell, this is going to be, it's hard to see, but this is kind of my perspective on an integration of system of systems in a city. The gray slabs are the horizontal infrastructure, distributive under our streets. They connect up to our buildings. If those are working, a city can develop essential services from food supply, emergency, fire and law, banking and finance. If you can take out a mortgage, you can build a house, send kids to school, access health, and hopefully you have good governance, your social services. What I want to point out, though, is that 100% of our food, fuel, materials come from outside a city, right? We don't, there's urban gardening, I know if there's, so don't get mad. But I mean, really listen. 99.99% of our food, fuel, materials come from outside the city. So you have to consider the regional infrastructure, and you also have to consider the climate change impacts on that. So climate change is impacting a large portion of, well, the entire world, but most of our resources come from outside the city. So we also have to expand our view of that. So with that, and we look at it through a local lens, a national lens, and what is being worked on right now is a social lens to tie in social vulnerabilities. And I worked with New York University on a LAMP methodology for doing that. But I'm going to end it there. Oh, there's another one.
Keep going, Mark.
This is, I
Keep
promise,
going.
last one. And that regional infrastructure starts to tie in the conversations. How do you talk about decarbonization unless you understand your supply and your demand? How do you talk about reliability unless you understand your transmission and distribution? Because a copper wire could care less if it's a fossil fuel electron or a renewable electron, so that there's different footprints of resiliency and sustainability for each of these transitions. So I hope that frames some of the conversations today.
So Jessica is giving me permission to introduce myself here. So, okay. So, yeah, I just want to reflect a little bit. I think Michelle and Mark did a masterful job of touching on some of the information. I know we're on a campus today with 3 universities, 3 colleges, so you guys are getting a lot of information today intentionally here. But they started to talk about, we've heard presentations on climate, on housing, talking about homelessness, talking about infrastructure. And I love Mark's phrase he just used. We've got a system of systems, so a lot of what we want to do with you guys from this point forward this afternoon is talk about that integration and how various systems are interrelated, and you can't talk about climate without talking about water. You can't talk about jobs, as Elizabeth did so masterfully, talking about jobs spend the night in a home. So we're going to be talking about some of that integration here. So I've put this title on my session here, Already Not Yet. We're going to talk a little bit about what Colorado has done Some of it has been good attempts. Some of it we've had some challenges. And we're going to do a little comparison of what is happening around. Again, Michelle did a great job introducing us to some unique solutions that they're trying in Illinois here. So we'll go forward with that. So just last day being a professor, sorry. Just a quick historical perspective that we're tying a lot of this into basic, how do we do planning and decision making here, and with a particular focus on Colorado. So we've had planning and zoning that a lot of you are familiar with. Some of you may know about it, just kind of on the sides here a little bit. We've had it around for about 90 years. And there's been somewhat of an evolution. So in the 60s and 70s, we decided to move away from what were just laws that enabled you to do planning. You were allowed to do planning, but weren't necessarily required to do it. So in the 60s and 70s, we had several states be a little bold and take a step forward and say, we feel we need to move beyond enabling legislation and begin to put some mandates and requirements out there as frameworks to help local jurisdictions do a better job of tying land use to transportation, to housing and environmental issues. Let's give Colorado a pat on the back here for being one of those trendsetters there. But the story isn't over at that point. So we'll continue it through. I'm actually going to move to the next slide here. So in the 80s and 90s, we actually had more states decide to join the bold ones here and create new frameworks. And we'll talk a little bit about what's contained in some of those frameworks for their counties, municipalities, and so on. You see one state up there at the top, though, that decided to go backwards. So Colorado is the only state to have ever rescinded planning legislation that it had put in place. So we experimented a little bit for about 4 years and decided we're just going to go back and just allow planning to be enabled. So let communities do what they want, with the exception of what Amanda Sandoval said in her presentation. We do have this thing that tourism is something that is required for local jurisdictions to do. That's a fascinating story. I'll tell it to you at another point in time. So as we go forward then, we see more and more states are finding opportunities and ways to evolve how they deal with planning, with environmental programs. What you see there with the states in different shades of blue are states that have followed the lead that Colorado once held back in the 70s to come up with more sophisticated integrated frameworks to bring issues together. Light blue states are doing it just a little softer with programs that they develop at the state level for their localities. California and North Carolina have a little different color there, so they separate their counties. So those counties that are along the water, so the coastal counties there, have a certain set of expectations and requirements that they plan with, but they're different in their inland counties there. And then the counties in green, both dark green and kind of that light green hue there, have focused on using the environment as an integrated framework there. So here's just another way to look at it, is just a spectrum, kind of listing out all the states here. So you have the states on the right that have these more integrated frameworks, either around planning and decision-making in total or around environmental statutes. And then you get to kind of the softer approach on the left. And Colorado kind of is not in the top half, shall we say here. So how does Colorado compare with some of these others? So, we've got 16 states now that have very comprehensive integrated approaches for how they address planning and many of the issues we've been discussing today. 12 states do this through more rigorous environmental programs. We already mentioned that Colorado tried in the 70s to do this, rescinded it. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a few other slides. So we've already said this, so yeah, we actually started with the Land Use Act pretty modest in early 70s. We gave it a little bit more rigor in 74, but by 4 years later, we ended up repealing it, and again, the only state to have gone in that direction here. We have a lot of background information on this and many of the other issues we're discussing with you on the website, so there's a pull-down menu you can get into to look at some of this. The governor in the 90s, Roy Romer, was getting a pulse. He said, we really do need to do growth management sorts of things here, but wasn't sure we had the political appetite to go back and re-engage what we had done a decade or so before. So he came up with this Smart Growth Initiative, which was do a lot of this voluntarily. So maybe we can try to do this without regulations and so on. I'm smiling here. I see Randy over there in the corner who actually worked with the state, worked with Governor Lamb. Did you work with Romer administration too? Okay, yeah. So he's got some battle wounds from that period of time here. What we found with this is there were a lot of awards given to places that were doing great things. We didn't really call out places that weren't doing great things. That is part of the overall equation here. And again, a lot of the national assessment was, what we're doing in Colorado is just very limited. And what's particularly interesting is a lot of these programs just lasted for about 12 years. So why 12 years? Election cycles. So we've got three-period term limits here in Colorado. So a lot of the elected officials that oversaw some of these efforts initially were replaced by a new generation of elected officials. Came so close in the late 1990s, early 2000s, so there was a movement to try to reestablish growth management. I see Rich over there shaking his head. He probably has some battle wounds from that effort, and came so close. That's the point in time where tourism and recreation were added as something local jurisdictions needed to do. But when we went to act on an entire package, it fell short in the legislature. In the 2010s, this is an interesting story. The American Planning Association, I know we've got a lot of folks here affiliated with that organization here this afternoon, tried again and again and again. I mean, this is a state that has serious issues with water supply, water quality, drought conditions, all of this. Can we at least ask jurisdictions to address water in the local plan? Goes into the legislature, it fails. Goes to the legislature again, it fails. So third time's charm, or is it? I mean, the third version of what we finally did pass enables local jurisdictions to address water if they so choose. Okay, so we're kind of in that mode here as a state, and that's the current state of things here. So we'll take a quick look at what some other states are doing. Some of the colored paper on your table we'll work on a little later, but that summarizes some of what we're showing here. We should have mentioned too, Jessica, we forgot to at the top of the program here. So you have a QR code, so you can access all of this individually on whatever little electronic gizmos you have there. So you can have your own version as well as the one set we left at each table here. So I'm going to start with Oregon and Vermont first because they came online about the same time that Colorado did. So both of those states just focus their framework on what locality should do. So in Oregon, there's no statewide plan that's required or anything, but they have created a framework that says local jurisdictions need to work on these sets of issues when they go through comprehensive planning. It took a while from their initial efforts in the 70s to grow into this, but this has just become kind of a routine there. Similarly, in Vermont, you see some overlap, some of the same issues, a few issues a little distinct there in Vermont as well with their program. And then you start to see some jurisdictions that develop some more integration. So what's interesting with Florida, again, a lot of overlap with the issues there, but what Florida has done is created a statewide plan. So there's a state plan that addresses all of these issues. Then the regions in Florida have to address these issues too and reflect what's in the state plan. And then each locality, each county, municipality does that as well as their own comprehensive plan. You know, some people like to distinguish Oregon, which is just, here's things that localities do, that's kind of a bottom-up approach. Florida might be called a little bit more of a top-down approach because you have the state plan and then the regional plans nested in that as well as the local plan. There has been some modification of Florida's law over the years. So, oops, I see Rodney giggling here. So he has some Florida time in his history here. But again, I mean, basically that framework continues to operate. New Jersey is another place just a little interesting for us to think about if we're looking at models and thinking about what are some possibilities for Colorado. There's a statewide plan and then local plans. And interestingly, the counties serve as kind of a go-between in the function. So they look at the statewide plan and they look at the local plans and see if they mesh. Okay, so a little different approach there. Much more modest list, although the last one's kind of open-ended relationship with other plans here. All right, and then some of the newer generation of places. So Georgia came up with a system where, again, there's this modest set of issues, but they're moving away from the just kind of stacking and listing and just talking about these things in isolation, this topic, this topic, this topic. They're beginning to show these topics relate to each other. And so it's a little bit more modest framework than some of the other states we've looked at, but this governs state planning, regional planning, local planning. So all of that is integrated in the Georgia model. And Washington State, where I've spent a lot of my professional career, plagiarized Georgia, to be honest here, and did something very, very similar in context here. What's interesting in the Washington context, so there's no statewide planning. There's an interesting provision in Washington's law that state agencies have to demonstrate that their planning is consistent with local plans. I mean, whoa, that's kind of a unique thing. And it's played out a lot in terms of certain transportation projects where the state wanted to do something and the locality said, you know, we're not looking at that type of widening or investment there. Okay, so they have regional policy. Each county then works on a set of policies with their municipalities and then the local level. Finally, here's a California example. We don't always like to look at California for examples here in Colorado, but I mean, this one's simple and somewhat elegant here. So this is regional planning. Again, this is legally binding that this sort of framework is used, but I mean, very recent. So you're seeing mobility, climate, housing, and equity all needing to be addressed in that framework. Colorado, and I won't go into this a lot, but we've mentioned it already. There's a list of items that, again, are optional for jurisdictions to consider. The State Department of Local Affairs does a nice job of providing examples, best practices, and some guidance there. But again, we don't have this required. We have no schedule for timelining or timelines are going forward. Okay, so just quickly, we've been saying this. We're moving to recognize these things are all integrated and interrelated here. So a couple of models we'll let you work with when you have your next discussion time here. So this is one that has been developed by the American Planning Association. Oops. Okay. And again, it's working really with that concept Mark introduced, systems of systems. So we don't layer out all the different, water, air, soil, climate, natural habitat, and so on. We take all of those together within the natural system. Same with the built environment. I mean, that's housing, that's our road network, that's our infrastructure, it's our consideration of community character, social systems as well, economic systems. I mean, it resonates a lot with what Madhvi said at the beginning here about circular economies and regenerative economies here. And again, within the framework of communities being healthy and connected. And this is a modest thing our team is kind of playing with to offer you guys. So it's taking a lot of these issues and, I mean, can we go from kind of layered suggestions, if you will, of things you might do in your plan to something that begins to capture integration. So, I mean, we're just throwing this out as something we thought of, but this needs to go on a little bit of a journey, and that's part of why you guys are here today, is to spend some time with it. All right.
Jasmin is with us from the Roaring Fork School District, right? Correct. And so we are so excited to open up this space here. I promise not to breathe on y'all, okay? All right. I've just been around a lot of people. So one of the things that we wanted to gather together were some folks who are actually doing this work, doing some integrative system work, sort of weaving these things together. So we have Anna Stout, who is the mayor of Grand Junction, Alfonso Espino, who works with the Global Elyria Swansea Coalition, and Jasmin Ramirez Ramos, who is from the Roaring Fork School District. And I just made sure I knew where you were from and then butchered your last name. I'm so sorry. I apologize. And so we are offering each of them an opportunity to give us a little bit of their story, and then we'll open up the floor to some Q&A from you guys. Then we'll take our break so that you can continue some of that conversation. And we'll come back where Rodney and I will tell you guys how to do what we've been talking about doing. So definitely stay for Module 3. But take a moment to turn your attention towards the panel. We will not be looking up here at any of the projected screens there for a moment. But if you guys would like to introduce yourselves briefly, and then I can ask you some questions. If you pass that, then I don't have to fight with you guys about it, right? And it should be fine.
Good afternoon. Thank you to the team for inviting myself in this panel.
Thank you.
So Anna beat me because I live in Glenwood Springs. So Grand Junction is further away. But I wanted to take a second also to honor the fact that you guys started off with a student. And in my work, that is who the work I do directly impacts students in our district. And it was just a great way to remind this community why the urgency exists. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. My name is Anna Stout. I'm the mayor of the city of Grand Junction, but I'm also the executive director of the Roycehurst Humane Society, which is the largest regional humane society on the Western Slope. And I am a certified Spanish translator and interpreter, and I work in primarily court settings, but also medical and business. And I'm also the founder and president of the Foundation for Cultural Exchange, which runs Grand Junction's sister city down in El Salvador. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Anna.
Hello, and thank you for having me. My name is Alfonso Espino. I am a community organizer for the Global Elyria Swansea Coalition, my beloved coalition. And more importantly, I've grown up here and lived here my whole life thus far, thankfully. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, you guys. Take a second, and I'm not going to call on you, sort of pass the microphone around. If someone hogs it, I will exert control. But the facilitator benefit here, I would like to know what you think the top 2 challenges for your community are. I'm sure there are multiple challenges facing your community, but if you were forced to list 2 of them, what are the top 2?
So that's funny because I actually have like 6 pages of our biggest challenges. But our top challenges I don't think are different than what a lot of Colorado cities are going through. We have a severe housing shortage right now, so that housing crisis is for ownership, it's for rentals, and it's also producing a lot of homelessness in our community. So that's one that's primarily affecting us in a way that it hasn't until just recently. And then also I think mental health would be the other situation that we're facing right now. We have one of the highest rates of poor mental health in the state. We have some of the highest suicide rates, especially youth suicide rates. And while it's not specifically a city problem or a city issue, it's obviously a factor in everything, including housing, and including economic development, job creation, education, and outcomes in general. So I would say currently those are the two things that we're working the hardest on.
I would say that the first and most present challenge that affects people's material conditions in my communities is definitely housing, the very basis on which somebody can live and thrive. And then the second, which I think is directly connected to that, is the violence and the power of the state against communities like ours. And that signifies a lot of things, but I think it is a good, just general issue that's been continuing, and that overlaps a lot of different issues, whether it's the environmental degradation, the targeted degradation of our communities, whether it is the continued colonization of our communities and our people and subjugation to that power, whether it's the kicking out of people forcefully from their homes and the use of state powers like eminent domain, whether it's driving through another freeway expansion and privatization of those public utilities. I see that all as interconnected to the violence and the power of the state and the direct power imbalance between a community like ours and the really what is institutionalized white supremacist state, which I think often is too much used as a buzzword, and we forget the actual significant violent undertone that I think it gets kind of getting into a little bit of the conflicts of popular political agendas, because this whole country is right-wing in economics, and planning is a right-wing institution, and the only intention of planning is to facilitate the flow of capital.
Oh. I'm so sad.
No, but actually to follow up to his point and to Anna, so I am, I think we're right on par for mental health. It was interesting to watch the demographers' PowerPoint presentation and see that Garfield County was right up there and, everything, and population growth and issues that we have like presently today that do include housing, that do include how we've been growing. And the one thing that we suffer with is not just mental health, but is the representation when it comes to leadership, right? So in my valley, there are, in Garfield County, there are 3 school districts, RE2, RE16, and mine, RE1. RE2 is 52.6% Latino, 44% white. RE16 is 60% white, 35% Latino, and my school district is 60% Latino and 39% white. In that whole valley, there are 9 cities. I'm one of 2 board members ever elected to the school board in any of those districts, and one of 4 elected people of color. So the disparity, right, in regards to how we're able to advocate for our communities, especially recognizing that we are a mobile community, we're a rural resort town, and then seeing all of the data that's coming up in rural Colorado, and particularly Garfield County, right, is being represented. And then you see the leadership that doesn't reflect the community. And so it really goes back to this notion that we are lacking, not just in all of these services, but how to adequately provide resources and connect with the community to hear what their needs are, because they directly know how to solve issues.
That's actually a brilliant segue into my second question. Thank you very much for providing that, which is what is working Are there creative things that are emerging and bubbling up? Are there some ways your community's been able to leverage and build? Can you share anything that is happening that we need to know about?
Yeah, let me try not to hog the mic on this because we have a lot going on in Grand Junction, and I think that if you kind of summed it into two themes, we're doing a lot of collaboration and we're doing a lot of innovation on top of innovation. So taking concepts like a co-responder program and bringing it in-house and making putting it on a more solid foundation. But one of the main things we're trying to do is involve the community. When I started on city council in 2019, we were facing very different problems than we're facing right now. And so most of what we're working on right now, we're in the early stages of. Despite having been working on a lot of these things for a while, we're addressing new realities related to them. So the city of Grand Junction just recently commissioned a housing study, and this has really helped us understand what's actually going on in our community. The city has traditionally not had anything to do with housing other than development codes, right, and annexations and zoning. But in terms of us actually helping with housing generation and being a part of that, that's not traditionally been the city's role. Especially because if you know much about the western part of Colorado, it's a very libertarian mentality part of our state. So, you know, government getting involved in things like that has not normally been something that's supported. But we are saying that the quality of life of our residents really is impacted by things like housing. So for the first time in Grand Junction's history, we have a line item in our city budget for housing. We put $1 million aside just at the very beginning of the year, and then have also been finding other sources of funding to put into that so that we can help either leverage funding to help either land bank or help organizations that are working on developing attainable and affordable housing. I think that's one piece of it, is really starting to look at the fact that we as a city cannot just stay in a city lane anymore, and we have to start sort of putting some tentacles out and being a part of some of these other solutions. Putting money into, not just money, but also staff members. So we now have, we have 2 housing positions on staff at the city of Grand Junction. We have, we created a position that's specifically meant to do outreach, especially with our underrepresented communities. That was something that we've never done before. It was just not on anybody's radar, and it took a council member coming on and being a broken record over and over about what we've done to engage this community or that community to finally create that. And we also have really started focusing on how we partner with our university, with our nonprofits, with our housing agencies, and how do we actually get involved in all of that. So I think that collaboration and those partnerships are one way that Grand Junction is really working on that. And without getting into a ton of details, you know, I think that the way we look at economic development is another thing that we're doing. So when we see that we have an industry that's struggling or industries that are struggling, that's something we go straight to our economic partners to talk about. How do we get a shortage of workers in this industry trained up through our university and through our community college that's connected to the university. So making sure that we have agility to be able to address those problems. If there's a shortage today, let's not develop a program 6 years from now that addresses it. We need to, you know, stand up a curriculum for next semester or for next school year. And then the other piece of it is really just trying to figure out how our community can engage the community in solving these problems. Because the city really has had a paternalistic approach to governance for a very long time. Just from a demographic perspective, when I stepped onto council, I was the youngest person by 25 years. I'm the only woman on a 7-person council. So you can imagine representation is not really a strength in Grand Junction. We're getting there, slowly, very slowly. But one example of this is the ARPA funds, the American Rescue Plan. We got about $12 million, the city of Grand Junction did. And part of it we used for our lodging tax replacement. It was very technical, but the other piece of it, we had about $9 million left over. And instead of the city and the elected officials who are ostensibly supposed to be the voices and the representation of our community, we brought a committee together. And we have a citizen committee that is now determining what the biggest priorities are and how to dispense those funds. So it really is bringing the community in for their engagement and having their voices. We're also rewriting our entire zoning and development code right now. We're bringing it up to modern day standards. We're eliminating the whereases and henceforths of the documents, and really trying to make sure that it aligns with our comprehensive plan and our strategic goals, which include housing and quality of life, and obviously the basic things like infrastructure and public safety. But for that, we brought a committee together that was also made up of community members, so that we're making sure that as we're talking development and as we're looking at land use and as we're looking at our annexation rules and our codes, that they're not overlooking people who are being impacted by that. The one voice that I think we've done a really poor job of engaging to this day is our youth voice. We just approved a 10-year comprehensive plan that basically dictates how we use land for the next 10 years. And we didn't bring any young people in. And there are 17, 16, 18-year-olds who are going to be raising families and buying their first homes and standing up businesses in a community that they were not involved in that plan-making process. So I'll pass from here.
I would say, I may have came off as a pessimistic person.
It's okay.
I don't
Good reason.
mean to. It's just the reality in which we live, right? But in our community, I think the thing that we are most famous for, and us being Go-Village Swansea Coalition, our community, our neighbors that are organizing with us, is definitely the land trust model. But it's not only land trust in name, because its simple existence does not equal its success. The reason, the foundation for its success, why it's working in our community, is because it is owned by our community. There are other land trust models, land banking models that exist across the city and across the state and across this country, but that are mimicking, mirroring corporate style housing, government style organization, and has no actual basis in the community, has no actual power collectively in the community. So I would say it's working because of the fact that, of course, it's not only producing housing, but it's housing that we control. It's housing that's putting people into homes at a very rapid pace compared to what people thought was possible. The early stages of the coalition 5-7 years ago, a lot of current and former city folk being the government workers, were explicitly opposed and told a lot of our organizers to their faces that what you're doing is impossible. 5 years later, it's produced 12 houses. It has more on the way. It's consistently finding funding, the residents, the neighbors to participate in what I regard as the biggest success of the land trust, which is the political education side of it. It's a changing of the paradigm of our connection to our community and our land, where we are moving from being, the equivalent of modern day serfs into a model in which we recognize the inherent value of the land and our association to it and our collective power and our collective struggle. And the significance of that, I think, is that it's disrupting this logic that I even hear still permeating today of this logic of the market and the supply and demand and the individualism, as if there isn't this whole violent system backing it up, as if there isn't commodification of these very things that we're talking about, as if there isn't a motive for profit, and in terms of the land that I'm speaking of, the speculation of it, as if that's never part of the conversation, as if what's been happening over the past decade in Denver, but really continuation of the history of the United States, but even was more apparent than ever because the white middle and upper classes are now feeling the effects of it. I think we're demonstrating or successfully showing both the outsiders, those coming in, those living outside of the perimeters of our community, and most importantly, those inside of it, those that are most impacted by these policies, the only way out, which is a collective struggle, collective vision, and collective agreements to change the world around us, to shape the world around us, because this isn't, something that can't be touched. This isn't something that can't be done. And the land trust model alone, when it's actually rooted in that collective power, is the biggest success to date, and we're definitely most known for it. But don't let that word confuse you, because it's the foundation of it that I just spoke of that make it successful, not its mere existence.
So I guess I will be the pessimist on the panel, but I think for us being a rural resort town, we are for the first time in the history of our community building infrastructure. We are, since the pandemic, for the first time having conversations on disparities and inequities in our community, not just around representation, but lack of resources. I live an hour away from Aspen, which is, it's Aspen, like you know what that means, right? When I say Aspen. And yet our school district, who is 60% Latino, also has 56% of our students in free and reduced lunch. And so, I think for us, the only success that we've had has been, since the pandemic, this urgency that nonprofits, right? We have over 500 nonprofits in our valley, that for the first time they realized that they have missed the mark on serving our community truly. And so I think that urgency has carried over, the accountability to these nonprofits. And I don't want to just say the nonprofits locally, but the nonprofits that say that they're statewide, right? If you're a statewide nonprofit, that includes rural Colorado. And so I think that urgency and that sort of accountability that's coming from communities like mine has really, since the pandemic, taken off. And it has really put us on the map of Colorado. I think also, we have, as we've seen through PowerPoint presentations today and data, we have a lot of issues. We have housing, we have mental health issues, we have fires. Grizzly Creek fire was in my district. We just had a fire on Wednesday before I left. I went to come here because I was afraid that there might rain and there would be a mudslide and I'd be stuck on that side. And my neighbor came out and, she was scared, right? The fire was near her home. And the fact that we still have a system of communication that doesn't represent the community that we live in, that doesn't share out information in our native tongue to make sure that everyone who is close by knows that this is a life or death situation sometimes, it is so troublesome, right? That we rely on friendly neighbors to tell us if we're safe or not. And so I think for areas like mine that are rural resort, that have a moving economy, have a lot of money coming in and out, we have very basic infrastructure needs that are not being met yet. And I think that since the pandemic, that urgency and that the power to keep those in power accountable has become larger.
Good. That's exciting news. I'm not ever going to call that pessimism or inappropriate. I think that's the kind of thing that's real and true. I'll remind you that politeness is not a gospel value, and that being straightforward is actually the loving choice.